Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Palikari Business Podcast. I'm your host, Abby, joined by my co-host and husband, Nick. Palikari is a Greek word that means a person who has achieved great things beyond their years. On this podcast, we hope to help you achieve great things by having conversations with successful business owners, entrepreneurs, and influencers from all walks of life. If you want to learn how to start a successful business, grow in leadership skills, or receive practical encouragement on chasing your dreams, this is the podcast for you. Our guest today, Cassandra Houston, has approximately 20 years of experience in the field of human resources, training and workforce development, HR strategy implementation, and employment law. Cassandra is a best-selling author. Her book, Leading from Within, Leading with a Purpose, is #1 internationally in 10 different E-categories in business management and leadership. We had the privilege of meeting Cassandra in person about a month ago, and she is so awesome. We really love getting to talk to her and hearing the stories she has and the wisdom she can share about leadership. I absolutely love her book. I personally think it is the best book on leadership I've ever read, and I cannot recommend it enough. You should definitely check it out. But without further ado, let's get into this episode. Okay, so Cassandra, can you share a little bit about yourself and how you ended up writing a book?
Sure. So I've been in the HR field for over 20 years in leadership positions. And I really enjoy the leadership portion of it. I really enjoy the HR portion of it. And over the years, I've had some really great effective leaders, and I've had some really bad, some ineffective leaders. So, and I think all of us can kind of attest to that and kind of relate to that. So, I've always wanted to write a book. And years ago, I wrote a couple of children's books, but I never published them. So I was like, well, I really want to do the children's book, but what is it that I really, really want to do? And so my inspiration came, my father passed away last year, and he was actually my motivation for writing the leadership book. And it was based on some things that he had done in his life to show all of his girls, leadership. But so I was online one day on Facebook, and so there was this book challenge. And in the book challenge, it was done by Bestseller Publishing. And so what you had to do was just attend this 5-day workshop and kind of, gain insight and knowledge on how to write your book, how to market your book. And so there were little challenges each day that you had to do in order to win like these publishing prizes. So I was like, I don't know, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And so each day there were prizes based on the little homework that we had. And the final day, we had to record ourselves, kind of telling why we wanted to write our book, how we market our book, and what niche um, uh, in the market that where our book would be. So I went ahead and did that, and so it was a $10,000 publishing prize. And so I won that publishing prize, and I was like, okay, this is it. This is my sign. This is what I need to do. I know what I'm going to write about. So that's kind of how it all started with me writing my book for leadership and my passion for leadership.
That is so awesome. Yeah. And I personally love your book. I read it. I loved how you approach leadership with I think you have so much humility, and the way you present leadership is it's so much about that, about serving people, about being relational, and about having that humility. And I really admire that because I have read a lot of other leadership books, and I've never read one that resonated with me quite so much as yours. So first of all, I just wanted to say that.
Thank
um,
you. Thank you very
yeah,
much.
of course. So then I guess we'll just get started with some questions from your
Okay.
book. So the first thing I
Okay.
wanted to ask you is, how would you define an effective leader?
So I always think about, we have this differentiation between, we'll say hard and soft skills, but I relate to them as internal and external skills. So an effective leader for me is one who has what it takes from the inside. These things can't be taught. So I give you an example. So you can have someone who has all of the knowledge, they have the degrees, they have the entrepreneurship, but what takes to be an effective leader is what you have inside. You have to have what what it takes inside in order for people to follow you. And that includes the humility, the compassion, the empathy. That's first of all looking at yourself to see where you need to improve, and then asking people, how can I be a service to you? How can I be a resource to you? And leadership is not about dictating and telling people what to do, but it's teaching them what to do. So, in mentoring, so that's to me is what makes an effective leader is what you have internally versus what you have externally. I can't teach you teamwork. I can't teach you how to respect people. I can't teach you how to build those relationships. I can teach you how to add, how to subtract, how to multiply, but all of those internal things that we get as when we're growing up from our parents, I can't teach you that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
it's good.
And so you briefly mentioned it already, but can you
Mhm,
go a little more in depth about what
mhm.
inside skills versus outside skills are?
Yes. So internal skills are those skills that you have inside that makes you who you are. And I'll give you an example. Someone who has patience, someone who is able to sit down and have that park-bench conversation, who's not judgmental, who listens to understand versus listening to respond. Um, External skills are those I call hard skills, and those skills are, the educational skills, the skills that you come along, things that you know how to do. Um, let's say, for instance, I'm in HR. It's my skills in HR law, and it's my skills as in budget. But the internal skills are more of a softer relatable skills. I'll put it that way. Skills that you can relate to, skills that that people see. People don't always see your external skills, but they always see your internal skills, and those are the skills that you're judged upon are your internal skills. How you treat people. You know, they could care less really about the people that report to you. Can care less about you know. How many spreadsheets you can do in a day, or how many businesses that you own. It's how you treat people.
That's really good because I think a lot of leaders can almost look at it as a top-down thing where it's like, oh, these people are under me, they do what I say, all that stuff, but it's really comes down to a relational thing and about caring about the people that are under you, because if you don't care about the people that are working for you or that you're leading, then they're not going to be around for you to lead much longer, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing of it is that when you have people that report to you, you're not there just to give them directions and orders and say do this and do that, but you are actually mentoring them to become leaders. So you have to look at it. If I'm absent from my position one day, other people won't even know that I'm absent, because guess what? I have, mentored my workforce, to act as if I was not there, as if I was not missing. So I think that that's very important, to, when you're mentoring people, is to mentor them for those leadership roles. You never know. You may have a leader in your group and you just don't know it. And so that's when, it takes you sitting down with someone, getting to know them, having those one-on-ones, and having those conversations with them.
And that actually made me think of another question too. So you're, as a leader, you said like you're mentoring your people to help them become leaders as well. How do you avoid, I think it's a trap that people can fall into where they're almost trying to replicate themselves in the people they're mentoring. How do leaders
Absolutely.
avoid that, I guess?
And I mentioned that in my book. You're not leading people to replicate how you lead. You're teaching them, or you're trying to bring out those internal skills and have them to assess themselves so that they can become their own leader. And I always say everyone is born a leader. It's what you do with those skills, and how and what type of leader that you create. So I think that it's not you trying to sit, and that's what the book is all about. It's not trying to recreate leaders like I think they should be created, but having them to look at themselves and your internal skills and where you want to be, and look at some past experiences that you've had, compare those to what you're doing now. Is it better, is it worse, what can you do better? So it's kind of mentoring them to become the leader that they're born to be, not what I want them to be.
It is really good, and it creates like some longevity in your team too. Because if you're mentoring them
Absolutely.
like that, then they're on the
Absolutely.
same page as you, and
Absolutely.
it can hurt you a
Absolutely.
lot if you guys aren't on the same page. So
Absolutely. And I can give you an example. So I just recently transitioned to a new job, and so I have this executive director who is amazing. And this is something that he told me, and it resonated with me because you don't find most leaders that do this. But he told me that he was in a meeting one day, and someone suggested something, and then he kind of just immediately shot them down. But then he thought about it and went back and he wrote an actual letter of apology, put it in writing, and spoke with that person one on one and said, I was wrong. I should have listened to you, or I should have said, well, here's what I was thinking, or, let's come up with something together. So he realized, and his internal self realized, this what had nothing to do with his external skills. It had everything to do with him internally. And he wrote a letter of an apology because he wanted her to have that in writing. And that employee is still there, you know, for years, have been there for years. So I admired that anyone who can, or any leader, or anyone that can say, I apologize, I was wrong, because that takes a lot of courage to me to especially, to say that I was wrong and apologize.
Yeah, that's really good. And that takes a lot of, like you said, courage and humility, and that, like you said,
Yes.
is something not
Yeah.
everybody has.
yeah,
No. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Because the other problem I think that we see in leadership is that the person that's the leader thinks that they have to be the best in the room at everything. So
Right.
you talk down to people like you could never apologize because you're supposed to be the best in the room at everything.
Yeah.
But a good leader surrounds them with people that are actually better than them at everything to do what they're good
Absolutely.
at, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always tell, I've always told my leaders that when you're performing even performance reviews, this is not just about the employee. This is not about just about the person that reports to you. It's about you as well. So that should be a conversation. What can I do better? How can I be of service to you? What can I do? What am I doing that I should be doing? And what am I not doing? And how that comes. That's a performance review, because most, and you've been in those. Most time when you go in the performance review, you're already like this, because oh, they're going to say something bad, they're going to do this, and it's a way to, to point out, people's the things that they're not doing. But you shouldn't wait till their performance review time either. This should be a coaching and a mentoring along the way, so by the time performance review comes, you can have that conversation, say, you started off like this, but guess what, you improved this and this. That's the type of conversation you would want to have. Not wait till the performance review and say, well, for the past year, you've been this, and this. And the employee is sitting there looking like, what are you talking about? Because they thought in their minds, I'm doing a great job. So, internal, looking at where you are as a leader internally, forces you to do things like that, and to take that avenue.
And that brings me to another question. There's the leaders internally looking and using that as they're evaluating employees and encouraging them. How do you also kind of implement that for yourself, like looking back at where you've come from or looking
Mhm.
at things you've done to learn? How do you kind of do that self-evaluation as a leader as well?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways that you can do that. One, I like to do what I call 360 reviews. If I'm going to review my staff, I want them to review me. That's one thing, because people tell you the hard truth. And some leaders do not want to hear the hard truth, and they need to hear the hard truth. And so that 360, and that's either from your peers, that's either from your own staff. And then again, in the book, I mentioned evaluating yourself. Number one, if you're not going to be honest with yourself, you do not need to read the book. You do not need to read the book. You need to be able to say, well, you know what? Looking back, I don't think I, handled that situation correctly. But in the future, how can I handle that situation differently? But it's looking at, you know, your past history, that, how you handle things. And could you have done that better? That's assessing yourself, but also getting that input from everyone else. Even, and this transponds over to your family life. If you're a husband and a wife and you're looking at it, because I always say this book is not just for, the workplace. If you look at it, you can, transfer that over into your personal life as well, because in each of your families, you are a leader. You're the parents. You are the leader. So you have to look at it. Am I being the best parent? Am I being fair? Am I listening to my kids? Am I listening to understand, or am I listening to respond to tell them no? you know so yeah. So I think that it's a combination of a lot of different things, but those two criteria is has worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I think that kind of leads well into this next question I had from your
Okay.
book. Can you talk about the 4 pillars of self-awareness that you wrote about?
Right. Okay, so the 4 pillars of self-awareness, so where I actually came up with that, I was reflecting on kind of like what is the foundation for becoming an effective leader. So I was looking at it, and so everyone has what they call equity or self equity. And the self equity is basically your combination of your internal and your external skills and evaluating what they are. And it kind of evaluates your leadership ability. So everyone has that. And then the self inspiring is just comes from the motivation of you being a leader, why your purpose for leading. And then self change, I talked about if you are not willing to change and you don't want to, self reflect and be honest with yourself, then you don't need to read the book. But you really need to be able to change anything that, that you're currently doing to become a better and effective leader. And then your self inventory is basically almost the same as the self equity, but it's those things that make up you as a leader. It's what does your leadership style looks like, and it's assessing yourself and building that inventory. And it's just like I give this example. So if you and especially on the self equity, so if you have a house, when you buy a house, you start incurring equity in that house. When you start building onto that house or doing something to the house, you're increasing that equity, right? So the same thing works with your leadership skills. In order for you to build that equity in yourself, you need to add on to those leadership skills. And I think we do that by having those internal skills more so. Yes, the external skills, but I think that in order to be an effective leader, you need those more of the internal skills.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned change in that. And so how do you implement change effectively as a leader, and what does that process of change look like? I know in your book you mentioned change is a slow process. So can you talk
It
about
is a
that?
slow process. Yes, and it depends on what type of change it is. So I've been in many organizations where change is implemented so fast, and it's without basically warning. And for most of us human beings, we need to have an explanation for everything of why change is happening. So therefore, when you're But when you're in those first stages of implementing change, number one, you need to anticipate every question that will be asked of you. You need to make sure that, okay, is this change needed? How will we implement this change? When, where, who will it affect? Will it affect anyone? And so once you've done all of that, then there's communication. People, you can never over communicate. People want to know the ins and outs of the change and why, because anytime change happens, it doesn't matter regardless of whether or not it's positive or negative, someone will find the negative in it. So you need to make sure that when you communicate change, that you know who your audience is and you break it down to their level of understanding. Everyone cannot understand at the higher level. You need to break it down to a level, you have to know your audience and break it down to their level of understanding. And then when I say that change should be implemented slowly, that's what I mean. You have to go through all of those steps prior to and involve those people that where the change is going to be affected by, involve them in somewhat of the decision making. Even if you have to go out and do a poll, conduct a poll of some type, people have that buy-in when they know they've been included in that change. So that's kind of what I mean when I said change. It's a slow process because you know we as human beings we have to think about it. We have to see how it's going to benefit us. We are slow to change. We just can't change just like that.
Yeah, and I really like what you just said too about being open to suggestions or feedback from
Mm-hmm.
your employees, because that's something you mentioned in your book that I liked, was that as a leader, you have to be open to hearing
Mm-hmm.
from those working for you and those under you, whether that's criticisms or that's ideas, just not thinking you have to be the center of everything, but you can actually be open to
Absolutely.
feedback from others.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how do you then kind of get everybody on the same page as your vision or the mission that you're going for as a leader?
So what I've done in the past is I've gone to them. I'm thinking about doing this. What are your suggestions? And who knows, someone may give me a suggestion that I've never had, that I never thought about, and that has happened. And it's actually being positive about, the change, being positive, encouraging them that we're in this together. And like I said, getting that feedback and then being, number one, transparent, open and honest. You need to be transparent. You can't sugarcoat it, because, once you sugarcoat a change and then once the change happens, everyone's perception of what the change is and what actually happens can be like a significant difference. So you need to make sure that what you're telling people is going to happen is going to happen. So being upfront and being transparent and having an avenue for them to ask questions, even after the change has been implemented, giving them the opportunity to ask questions and to give feedback. So I think that's very important, and that has worked to get people on board of the change.
That's really good. And I like that because, like you said, it creates that buy-in. They feel invested because they've been
Yes,
involved in that process. So
right.
that's really
Absolutely.
good. So then I had another question from the book. How do you set healthy expectations as a leader?
So the first thing I always look at, is it something, and I involve myself. So I would not ask someone to do something that I myself would not do or I'm incapable of doing. So how do you do that? You involve the person. And the expectations, you involve the person in that decision, you involve them in goals. And I'll give you an example. So I have at Covenant Living, I had two HR assistants. And so at the end of the year, we always set goals. I didn't set their goals. I sat down and had a conversation with them. And I asked them, what goals, where do you want to see yourself? And if it was some things that I thought that they could improve upon, I just didn't say, this is what you're going to do. We discussed it first because I need to get their buy-in as well. Because if I didn't get their buy-in, you know, they would not implement anything. So it was getting their buy-in and discussing that with them and getting them to see where they can improve. But make sure that expectations, number one, are realistic. Make sure that they're achievable, and make sure that they will benefit that person. Because if it will not benefit that person, then you will not get the buy-in. If it benefits the person, it will automatically benefit the organization. So it's those are the things that you need to look at when you're setting expectations.
Yeah.
That's really good. And I love that you say if it benefits the person, it benefits the organization, because that's obviously the people make up the organization. So I really like that. That's good. So then, can you talk about the importance of accountability as a leader?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, I think that we as leaders need to hold ourselves accountable. And that's where this assessment comes in. And I talk a lot about that in the book, as holding ourselves accountable. If you cannot hold yourself accountable, you can never, ever hold anyone else accountable. People look and see what you do, how you do it, when you do it, and how you say it. So you need to make sure that you're holding yourself at the utmost highest level that you possibly can for for your supporters, for your employees. But you must make sure that you're looking at yourself. And if I'm wrong, just like my executive director, I'm going to say I'm wrong. If I don't know something, well, I really don't, I'm not sure about that, but let me get back to it's okay for leaders to say, let me get back to you. Or it's okay to say, I don't know. Let me go find out for you. It's okay to say that. People's expectations of leaders, is that they should know everything. They should know, they have this crystal ball. They should know everything, about their job. They should know everything. And that is such, that is untrue. That is so untrue. And you learn every day. Leaders are learning. Everyone is learning every day. Life is a learning cycle, so you have to let people know, again, in those expectations. And this is what I don't tend to know everything. If I can learn from you, I am excited to learn from you because I know I can learn from you. And you have to, set those expectations up front. If you go in set an expectation that you know everything, people are going to expect you to know everything. But if you go in, with some humility, with some compassion, and letting them know we're a team, we're going to work together, that's what they're going to expect.
Yeah.
That's really good.
It is really good. And
Yeah.
I mean, it takes away like you don't feel like you have to be perfect all the time too, because it's a
Absolutely.
learning experience,
Absolutely.
because in that sort of a relationship, there's kind of a different, people just treat you different in that sort of relationship, because like if you're always late, then they're not going to worry about being on time or anything like that, right? They lose all that respect.
Absolutely.
But if it's a relationship, then that doesn't really exist, because it's like, oh, we're growing together. So it's
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, it's just like, you as parents, we as parents, we have to set a good example for our kids. The same thing, it's the same thing in the workplace. We as leaders have to set a good examples for our employees. If they see us coming in and doing our job, and we're out there and we're displaying teamwork, we're displaying honesty, integrity, they will do the same. People will follow leaders that have a purpose for leading.
Yeah.
It's you set the precedent and the dynamic for how everyone else is going to interact and treat you because of how you treat them.
Absolutely.
That's so good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that kind of made me wonder, have you had any times where as a leader you've kind of had to have difficult conversations maybe with employees or deal with difficult situations, and how have you dealt with that?
Well, I try to make sure that when someone comes into my office, and it just depends on again, building those relations up front, getting to know who you're talking to in your audience. If it's someone that I know that I need to, hey, let's come take a walk, then I'll do that. If it's someone that I know that I can talk to in my office, I make sure, number one, I'm giving this person my undivided attention. I'm closing my laptop, I'm closing the door, I'm taking all the papers from in front of me because I want that person to know that I am listening to understand them. Okay. The other thing is you can't judge right away until you have all of the facts. You make sure that you have all of the facts, not opinions, not hearsay, but all of the facts. Having difficult conversations, it can be really it can either go one way, it can go either good or bad. Um, but I think the most important thing is the someone leaving knowing that you listen to them and that you have suggested some solutions to them. And my conversation it's always a conversation. It's not a one-way thing while I'm doing the talking or that person is doing. I'm going to ask questions. And sometimes I have people to realize, yeah, you were wrong in the situation. But it's a way that you do that. It's not you coming off being judgmental. It's not you coming out being accusatory. It's you listening and asking questions and then asking those hard questions that they never thought about and then having them to think about it. Most of the time, they go away either one or two ways. They're satisfied or unsatisfied. If they're satisfied, you're good. If they're unsatisfied, you give them avenues to continue their complaint. Um, and you always let them know that, look, if you have any additional information that you want to find out or you want to give it, please come back to me. But you still need to check on them after the fact as well, because now they know that they can come to you about anything. But having difficult conversations can be a little tricky, but also you need to know who you are inside as well. You have to have those internal skills because you have to have some compassion, some humility, and you have to make sure that you have a listening ear instead of sitting there judging them while they're
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Before you can't make judgments ahead of time. You have to be open. So that's really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I
Absolutely.
like that you keep bringing that up because I feel like it's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, but I think
Mhm.
that like listening to understand, you keep
Mhm.
saying that over listening to
Mhm.
respond, but I think that that's such
Mhm.
a huge thing
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
It, it is, and
Is
even in your personal life, when you're in a relationship, it's listening to understand the other person, not listening so that for me to respond, but you need to listen to each other to understand how the other person is feeling or what their concerns are. And even though they may be right or wrong, you're still listening to understand how they feel.
yeah,
Yeah.
because even when you're talking to someone and like you can tell if they're listening to respond, you can
Absolutely.
tell because they're just sitting there blank,
Yeah.
blank face, just waiting, and then they're like, okay,
Absolutely.
now it's my turn.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And it's such a simple sentence, but it really makes a huge difference. So I love that you keep talking about that. Yeah.
Right. And it's hard to do. I mean, it's a simple sentence, but it's hard to do. And I always tell people, I say the same thing about the word love. LOVE is a very small word, but it is a huge action. It is a huge action. Very small word, but huge action. Listening, small word, huge action.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so true. Um, okay, and then something else that I really liked that you mentioned in your book. It was again something you talked about briefly, but how would you define failure?
I don't really define failure as failure. I define it as a learning tool. I don't think anyone fails. I think that, we all make mistakes, but I don't think that we fail. Because here's the thing, if you tell someone that they fail or you feel that you fail, are you are you going to try something else again, or will you try it again to try to improve it? So we all make mistakes and we all want to correct those mistakes. But when people fail, they give up. And so I don't think that, I don't like to use the word failure, because that is a very, yet a small word but big action, and it's a very strong word. And so when you tell someone that you're just a failure or you fail, oh my gosh, that hits really hard to some people. But if you tell someone, well, you made a mistake, let's see how we need to correct it. So I don't think people fail. I think that we all make mistakes, but then we try to correct those mistakes. Failure, I mean, it's, to me, I don't even think should be in the vocabulary, but but I think that it's just a learning, it's a learning step for us. It's a stepping stone to being to success, So when your business go under, or if you have a business and it doesn't really do well, it was a mistake somewhere, but I don't really want to call it a failure. It's just, there are people that will say the word failure, have failed, but they've become successes. And it was just learning those mistakes that they made. So you see where I'm going with that? It's learning, is that, it was them learning, them becoming successes or successful was from those mistakes that they made that they thought was a failure, but it really wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I love that. I love that approach. And it's very encouraging too, because it's like, okay, if I do make a mistake, if something doesn't work out the way I thought, it doesn't mean that it's the end. It just means that I'm moving forward with that.
Yes. Yes. But failure, when you use the word failure, it equates to the end. Mistakes does not equate to the end, end.
Yeah, that's really good. And then I think my favorite part, I have the whole page like highlighted, but you talked about, I don't know if you'll remember this specifically, but you talked about for like a whole paragraph, you described leading as an art. And I loved that section. So is that something you could talk about a little bit?
Yes. I think that leading is an art because everyone has their own interpretation of leadership. And like I said at the beginning, everyone is born a leader, but it's what you create, is how you create that your leadership, what you do with it. And it's just like, I mentioned in the book, it's just like taking a painting, and you're creating this painting, and it's based on what you're envisioning, and it's taking everything that you have internally and putting it on a canvas. It's the same thing with leadership. You're taking everything that you have inside and you're putting it out there for everyone to see. Everyone, just like I stated before, everyone sees how you treat people, how you talk to people. They may not see what you're doing in your office on those hard skills, but they see those internal skills. So it's just like a piece of art that you want to display, that you've created. You should want to do that with your leadership skills, especially when you know that your leadership skills are those of an effective leader.
Yeah, that's really good. And I love viewing it that way, because it really is, because it's like everything you said is encompassed in that, because it's about building that team and mentoring people and evaluating yourself and evaluating that. So I really like that. Is a really good image, or I guess example of what leadership really is.
Absolutely. It's what you paint yourself to be. Well, I love telling, and I think you've heard this story before, but I love telling this story about my dad because I think that he was just so amazing. My dad had 5 girls. We were all in the house, and it was my grandmother, my mom. So there's 7 women in the house, 1 bathroom.
Oh no.
So, my dad, very patient man, very patient. So I told this story when I was speaking to the Turlock Rotary and my inspiration, because I talked about the inspiration of writing the book, and I talked about how my dad was how he became a car salesman. My dad was a mechanic, and he worked for this car dealer, his very first one as a mechanic, and I never forget, it was Robert Chrysler Plymouth. That's telling my age. And that was when they had Plymouths and Dodge. And so his manager, the GM, the person that owned the dealership, was named Mr. Billy Knowles. He was a graceful man. He was full of humility. He was what I call the epitome of a leader who led from internally. So, and then also my motto is, in order for you to see the best in people, you need to be the best for the people. And this gentleman, Mr. Knowles, did that. So, he asked my dad one day. My dad was at work early every day. He did whatever he was, asked to do, and even volunteered. He said, "Look, I want to make some extra money. I'll come and cut grass." And he saw what my dad was trying to do, and he saw the drive in my dad. He saw something in my dad. So he asked my dad if he wanted to be a car salesman. So my dad said, I know nothing about selling cars. He said, "You'll learn. I'll teach you." And so my dad, I didn't even know that there was you had to go to training classes to be a car salesman. So he went to training classes. He passed all of his classes. And so he promised Mr. Knowles that he was going to be the number one salesman his first year. My dad was the number one salesman for that first year and went on to be after that. So everyone was trying to figure out, how was he, people were coming up asking for my dad, and it was trying to figure out, how does he know all these people? You just became a salesman. So, and they noticed my dad coming in early to work every day. And so on the weekends, I remember this as a kid, my dad would go and put his business cards on every car on the car lot. But on the back, he would put, "Welcome, to Robert Chrysler. I look forward to meeting you." So the next morning, the day of work, then he would go and he would grab up all of his cards because he didn't want anyone to know his secret. And so people would just come in and ask for him. And not only did they buy one car from him, they would come back, a couple of years later and buy another car. So people wanted to know, the other salesman, what was he doing? And my dad said, "I built relationships even before I met my customer." And so that's kind of how we have to be as leaders. We need to make sure that we built those relationships even before we meet them, and that takes looking at ourselves internally. And I admire my dad, and he I learned everything from him as far as how to be a great leader. So
Yeah,
so
That's
I
really
love telling
good.
that
I like
story.
that story.
I love that story too. I loved when we heard it at the Rotary too. It was like, wow, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so people can find your book on Amazon and Kindle, right?
Absolutely. Amazon and Kindle, please, go on and buy the book. I promise you won't be disappointed.
It's so good. It's literally the best book I've read on leadership. I loved it. I actually sent a copy to my cousin too. She lives in North Carolina. I was like, "You have to read this." She
Oh,
has a
wow.
business. So yeah, I'm
Oh,
really excited. I
wow.
love this book.
Right,
Yeah. So
right.
thank you so much for being on our podcast, for just, this has been a great conversation, and we really, really appreciate you. And I love what you're doing, and everything you're sharing, I think, is so important. So hopefully more people will pick up the book and hear what you have to say about leadership.
Thank you so much, Nick and Abby. And I really, really appreciate you guys. You guys are wonderful. I appreciate what you're doing. And so thank you for inviting me to your podcast. It has been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Palikari Business Podcast. For more information about our guest, check out the links in the show notes. To connect with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok under the handle Hammond Cinematography, or just search Nick Hammond on YouTube. Nick and I are the founders of Hammond Cinematography, a video production company located in the Central Valley of California. If you'd like more information about us and our business, you can check out our website linked in the show notes. We'll see you next time.